Hello everyone, I'm Brian and welcome back. Let's go ahead and get started.
Sorry to bore you with it,
Yeah,
but it's also fascinating. It's again a personal journey, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. There's two here. One, I think he was first, and then this lady here.
Thank you for the book recommendation, by the way.
Oh, yeah?
I've seen a lot of them.
Yes,
I'm gonna
you
look
were
them
first, I think.
Oh.
Yeah. Sorry. Oh, there's 3 questions. Good, good.
Professor, it was a terrific talk. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. My name's Patrick.
Hi, Patrick.
I was wondering what role the gospel played. I mean, so could you talk about a little bit about that?
It's a really interesting question and really important. Vivekananda's relationship to Christianity, again, is extremely interesting and complex. He, unlike the Brahmos, who see Jesus as a pattern man, or he saw him as another avatara, but he also felt that Ramakrishna had surpassed. This was personal, Jesus. So he appreciated their love for Jesus very much. In my view, some of the most interesting things he said about the gospel was about the Gospel of St. John. And that's where he talks about the word, which means the breath. So he takes that bit of Christian teaching that comes very directly from Greek mysticism, and he connects to it when he speaks to them at Thousand Island. And that's one of the first lessons. And the only reason why it comes to mind so quickly in my head is because I'm working on that now. I'm trying to understand the relationship about why people think that Jesus was in India. This is a very important idea at the end of the 19th century. And so, Vivekananda's thought on this is very interesting to me. So yes, for example, at the Parliament, when he's talking about the hunger of India, he says, people are hungry and you give them stones. And of course, that comes from the Bible. He's constantly larding and peppering his speech with their own teachings. And that, once again, is Ramakrishna, you see? So instead of, the post-colonial interpretation of Vivekananda was that he diluted something that was authentic and imperialism and Western culture overlaid. I think that he was really trying to reach people in the West. I also think he wanted, when he spoke of the men in materialism, he wanted also to soften them and to render them less hard. And I think that's something that we don't understand. That was part of the anti-colonial message. Of course, when he went back to India, he shouted at the Indians to become more robust. And that's that whole thing of counter-preaching, to do what goes against the grain, but is to say, quote, the truth, to say what needs to be said. But I don't believe that means there were 2 Vivekanandas, which is what a lot of people often say. What fascinated me was how did he retain the centeredness despite having to travel back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I think it was very hard. I think it was one of the reasons he was so ill. I think he was exhausted, drained. They didn't know how to treat diabetes properly. So anyway, I didn't want to go off, but that's what I think. The gospel's everywhere. And it's in his head. He had to learn it at the Scottish Missionary College. So it's not, but it's also part of what creates the universalism. So for everything that's taken away from his earliest Hindu identity is enriched by the possibility of comparison and the attempt to connect.
Thank you.
This lady, yes.
Thank you for the presentation. I am Carissa, American Protestant woman. I was curious, how was the pranayama received in the American Protestant tradition among this group?
Well, there's so much about the actual practice of all this that I just don't understand. They didn't write that much about that. But they did talk, as I say, they knew about the breath and, the word, and but how they actually practiced it, I just don't know. He spoke a lot about it. And he did not mystify yoga. Meditation. He just said, I remember once they were talking and he just said, I'm going to meditate on the heart of a lion because it gives courage. And that's all he said. He gave tremendous freedom. And if you read Raja Yoga, he says, find an easy position, be comfortable, be erect. But he's, of course, not in favor of hatha. He thinks it's too much of emphasis on the body, on healing, on health, and getting results. Vivekananda tried to work against the instrumentalization of his spirituality, and it's something that people don't really understand. Because now yoga is considered something, to keep healthy. It's meant to be more. If you read Vivekananda.
Thank you.
Yes, he said. Yes. Oh, you. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I think he was next, and then I'm sure we have time. It's terrible when people don't notice you.
Hi, thank you so much for this talk. My name is John.
Hi, John.
Hi. So I read Vivekananda, and I was especially struck by Raja Yoga in my late teens, early 20s, something like that. And I immediately went around looking for a meditation teacher who could teach me in that tradition, and I couldn't find anything. I went around to yoga studios saying, "Oh, do you do Raja Yoga?" And they didn't. They gave me a lot of weird looks, and I found it so hard to find any living. And I know that, of course, I can see that there is, but I had a lot of trouble finding it. It didn't seem very prevalent, and the instruction I encountered was mostly Buddhist.
Oh,
and,
right, mindfulness.
And, yeah, and so and I ended up studying deeply in the Buddhist tradition. But I went first looking for Vivekananda's lineage and couldn't find it. Do you have thoughts on why the Buddhist approach to contemplative practice and meditation was able to root so deeply in America, and why the Patanjali-influenced, Vivekananda-influenced Raja Yoga approach to meditation is less dominant? And I'm sorry if that's well-trodden ground or a facile question. No, it's hardly
well-trodden ground. I mean, in fact, I don't really know the answer. This is probably to do with more 20th century things that I don't know about. And but the thing is, this idea that also all of this stuff is separate is not clear to me at all.
No.
And one of the things about Vivekananda is that he did not prescribe. This is it. He doesn't prescribe. And you'll see Patanjali is also very difficult because he uses Patanjali in a very specific way. Yeah. So I would just say that perhaps, I don't know. I mean, maybe you can answer that question better than I can, because I really think I don't want to misstep, because I have all kinds of ideas about this, but I really don't know the answer. Would Maharaj, do you have any ideas to respond to that question?
Maybe after you finish.
Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on that, because it's a very interesting question. I've often worried about it. I have a friend, the friend who I'm staying with here in New York, and she says to me, "But that's not real Buddhism." And I sit there, and of course, I'm an historian, and she's been experimenting with every school and thing, an American version, and I think, there is no real Buddhism. Buddhist modernism is created at the end of the 19th century. There's all these things going on. Ledi Soido, it's all going on. There's all this stuff. There's Zen. There's this. There's that. And of course, when techniques move context, they are transformed. They can't help but be shifted by culture. Yes. Yeah.
That is pretty curious as to, I wonder, I will say, I don't know how many Buddhists or say Advaita Vedanta teachings or schools are around here. And I'm assuming it's probably more in the west side of America and maybe northeast towards New York. But towards like the center of America and probably the south, maybe not so much. It's probably more in like California area and New York style areas where there's metropolitan areas where there's a lot more travel, international travel going on. Like if anyone was to come from outside to the United States, it's generally be New York or California, I think. So there's probably more of those things there than the rest of the United States. But that is pretty curious though. Why, at least from his understanding and from even, I don't know. I haven't really seen any around here, but then again, I don't live necessarily in the east or west of America, but why is it Buddhism so much more secular? I think Swami Vivekananda, Swami Sarvapriyananda says that Buddhism quite thrived in America. Wonder why that is.
It's a really good question.
It is a good
First of all, as you said, they're not all that separate.
They're not.
If you ask Vivekananda what he would have thought of that, person looking for a distinct Vivekananda lineage and then going to, not finding it, and then going to study Buddhism and practicing Buddhist meditation, he would be all for it. He would be fine with it, because as long as it's an authentic meditation tradition and the goal is spirituality.
Yes.
He would be delighted if you did that. Now, as to more specifically why this is so, one reason might be if you come to us, to the Vedanta Society, we don't directly teach Patanjali Yoga.
No.
Using Patanjali Yoga as the Yoga Sutras as a manual, we don't do that. We have our own meditation technique, which is an initiation into a mantra and a deity visualization, which is done by only a few authorized Swamis who can do that. And so that's why it's not directly related to the, it draws upon Raja Yoga, but it equally draws upon Tantra, it equally draws upon Bhakti also, and Vedanta to some extent, Kashmiri Shaivism also. So, and another thing is, if you look at Phil Goldberg's American Veda, which traces what happened right after Vivekananda, the whole stream of teachers from India, including Buddhist teachers, including Hatha Yoga teachers, Paramahamsa Yogananda coming in the West Coast and here also on the Self-Realization Fellowship. So a vast number of techniques and teachers sort of flooded across the United States and the West. And I think that was part of Vivekananda's intention all along. He was a door opener and a bridge builder. Yeah.
And I'd also say that, remember, the Buddha is a very important figure within Hinduism. And of course, they regularly compared Vivekananda to the Buddha himself. In their minds, Josephine often thought of him as both Buddha and Christ. And this is it. You do not control. Vivekananda realized you can't, and again, this is about visualization, which is what you were just saying. And she does, even though she's a friend, ultimately she does get a mantra, which is very interesting. I didn't know that until recently. So I also think many students go through different teachers at different stages of their life because they need different things. And as you say, he was a door opener. There's this flood of people come after him. And what's so interesting, if you look at Yogananda's memoirs, he actually goes and sees the people who knew Ramakrishna before he goes. So for all that he's different, and in the early, late, mid interwar 20th century, he's also following in a tradition already that Vivekananda has, in some sense, in my view, established.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm glad I left it to you, though.
My name is Oscar.
Hi, Oscar.
I have a question with regards to history.
Yes.
Since you're a historian. So around the year 1893, many things are going on. Two main forces. One is nationalistic, the other one is transnationalistic, universal and global ideas. One example of this is the year 1896. The Olympic Games is born. Ancient Greek ideas that is actually it's a religious ritual that honors Zeus, and that is brought over and expanded.
Yep.
Not just for the Greeks, for everybody. So do you think that also Swami Vivekananda is a product of his times? Without that, he wouldn't have been where he was at that point in history.
Of course, he is very much a product of his times, and he represents both universalism and nationalism. It depends where you are and what perspective. I mean, he never spoke of India as Mother India to his American disciples in America, not in lectures, but when he wrote to Indians, he spoke about Mother India. And of course, what he's really concerned about is the uplift of Indians, but he's not a nationalist ideologue. And I think there's a big difference. What I do think is interesting is that he recognizes this cosmopolitan bent and the universalism, but he also, and this is something I really admire, recognizes that there is also relations of power. And he is a representative of a subject nation, and he calls on it. He calls the Americans on it when he's there at the parliament, and he says it. So it's not, we're all brothers. He recognizes this, and he asks. And then, of course, he always tells, he gets to the most difficult lessons about loving the God in the terrible, which his Christian followers don't understand. How can you love the terrible? They're always telling him, teach people to be good, and he gets outraged because that's not his agenda at all. But when he is back in India and he sees the ravages of the famine and the ravages of the plague, it really, he has difficulty being detached. So that's the thing. On one level, he is rationalist, intellectual. On another, he is, the side of him that loves the Buddha and compassion. He is almost overwhelmed in his identification with the poverty, the sickness. It really hurts him. It's very hard to be to be detached in the face of that.
Yeah. Vivekananda, he was the first, and then we could say there is a lineage of gurus that came after him.
Yeah.
Paramahansa Yogananda, Swami Vishnu Devananda, Swami Chinmayananda. So that's a different route than the one that is happening in India. That's part of this universalistic idea, force, that is growing. And it's been welcomed, perhaps by, German philosophers as well.
Oh, yes, very much.
Arthur Schopenhauer, not just Max Muller, even Friedrich Nietzsche in a very antagonistic way.
Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
No, just that. This is just sharing. There's no question.
Well, I was going to just say,
I would like to ask you something.
Yeah, but let me respond to that. What's so interesting about Vivekananda is that at moments he would show his edge, often in humor. So, for example, he would say, I like chocolate because I'm chocolate. So he would talk about being brown in this amongst the white people. But there was once he's in Mont Saint-Michel, and in the dungeons there are these things called oubliettes, where they used to throw miscreants and forget about them. And he looks inside and he said, what a great place to meditate. Because you really have to detach, from your body, from everything. And the reason why that's such an amazing thing to say is that that's when Aurobindo, who's Sri Aurobindo, the great radical thinker and activist, when he's in prison, Vivekananda comes to visit him mystically, and of course he meditates in those conditions, and he says, "I'm Krishna in the prison house," So this is already, but they don't get it. But they note it down. They note it, but they don't get that edge because they're from a different world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Raja.
No, I have a. Oh,
That's okay.
sorry.
Tell us your name for the internet audience.
I'm Raja Chowdhury. I'm a filmmaker, and I'm fascinated by your take. I'm fascinated by your take because the sacred feminine aspect, the feminization of spirituality. But one question I had was that the revolution that I saw also in parallel to that was a linguistic revolution. The use of language that he brought about changes. There was a wonderful quote recently that everything from corporate retreats to pews across America are using Vedantic language now, without knowing the way it comes from. The language has changed. And the other thing I've seen is that the culture changed with the use of language. You had from Somerset Maugham through to Matrix to Star Wars.
That's right.
You name it, So the unspoken ripples of that one pebble in 1893, I love the way you've taken it, but what's your thinking on that?
Well, I wonder, what I think? I mean, of course, we all know that.
Sorry.
We know that language. I mean, the language already, when he talks about God consciousness and realization of the self, that's already there through transcendentalism in the 19th century. These things about the self become very important. But the language that you're talking about, the Vedantic language everywhere, I wonder what he would make of it. Would he find it all too much? Would he find it not spiritually specific enough? Would he find it undisciplined? Or would he find it fructifying and fertile? And I think he would probably find it both. I think this was a man who understood paradox and things that change over time, and that you cannot know what will happen next, in a way, But I wonder what you think. Do you think that the linguistic shift is actually denotes a change within, or a change of culture? And how deep is that change?
I think it's been a massive change in a positive direction.
Right.
Mainly because, what the revolution that began with Raja Ram Mohan Roy in the Brahmo Samaj, that led to Vivekananda, that led to Ramakrishna, Keshav Chandra Sen, all of that, was a spectacular fusion of East and West that never existed before. And that was a fascinating integration. And then when he brought it here, and Americans embraced it, I thought that was a very positive revolution, definitely. That's my feeling. Yeah. And it has changed because it takes away from the intolerance of racism, it takes away from issues of climate change, it allows us to think of Mother Nature, of the universe, of each other in a more tolerant way. So I think it's been a positive blessing.
Oh man, every time they say tolerant now, I think of Osho as tolerant as a terrible word, because it means just to tolerate someone. It doesn't mean you accept them, you just tolerate them. Oh my gosh. But I was thinking along the lines of unifying. Obviously, that's what Advaita Vedanta is, I think, trying to do, and the teachers of that, or most spirituality. I don't know about Buddhism, though, to go to nothingness, which in some sense is unifying as well, to nothing. But, unifying in terms of the East and the West.
Does that make sense?
Yes, very much. Okay. I mean, I think that what he also was trying to do was he used the term often, shopkeeper religion, and that was a term he got from Ramakrishna.
Yes.
Which I hadn't realized. But of course, he was always shouting at the Americans, "I don't like your shopkeeper's religion." And what he meant was, you were always trying to look for what you could get back, the contractual. If I'm good, then I go to heaven. He really didn't like that. He really didn't like that. I think what he was asking of people was to...
Real quick, before she goes on to the next part. So the shopkeeping thing, then what about karma? How you reincarnate then? Is that not the same thing, considering the fact that, if you do good, you reincarnate higher, then if you do bad, you reincarnate lower. I'm not sure where the elevation is at, but isn't that not necessarily the same thing? Is that something that Vivekananda itself believes in, or is that something that he dismisses, saying that that's not true? Let me know if you know, because if what you're saying true about the shopkeeping thing, then the elevation in terms of your karma, good karma, the more you reincarnate into higher planes. But if you do more bad karma or whatever, maybe you elevate, you get reincarnated in lower planes, which is like animals or plants, and then humans up top, then heavens above that, or something like that, or deities. I can't remember.
I know this sounds a little bit gooey, but to open themselves up
Yes.
to other possibilities of thinking. And for me, what I find so important about Hindu universalism was that it was a universalism that was not Enlightenment universalism.
Mm-hmm.
It was not a Western universalism.
Mm-hmm.
So it was neither the Christian exclusivity that you could only come through the Father, to the Father through Christ, but the second was that it wasn't only through the rationality of the Enlightenment or through human rights. I mean, many, like Gandhi was not concerned with rights, he was concerned with duties, dharma, you know? And I think if you read Vivekananda, he's also really concerned with dharma. Some of the best bits in the writings are about the Gita. But he also has tremendous difficulty trying to translate this concept as it's simultaneously being transformed in India by political culture and sociology. So I'm not sure the full lesson came. And in that, I think I'm a little bit less optimistic than you.
I understand.
Yeah. But I hope you're right. Nonetheless, that Hindu universalism, you know, Westerners thought they were modernity, you know. And if your trajectory is right from Roy through Vivekananda, this is a new modernity. This is
Correct.
You know, this is it. So he's saying, listen, you know, this is a different thing, and he's also saying include everyone.
Agreed.
Do not think in imperialist terms. And at the same time, he's constantly having to fight against terrible stereotypes. You know, women actually ask him, do the women in India throw their babies to crocodiles? Again and again, he has to hear this stuff.
What?
Do you see? And he has to contain himself, you know, in the same moment when he's fighting with the poverty and you know, so it's driving him crazy. He's trying to, that's what I'm saying about how does he retain that centeredness in the midst of being pulled apart by this, and trying to retain some sense of compassion for these people who keep on saying, do the women throw their babies to crocodiles? It's tricky.
I have never heard of that. What in the world? Is that something that's been said? I've not... That's really... Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's somebody in the back. And then I think maybe... Yeah. Yes, I've kept you for so long. I hope you don't mind. No.
Thank you, Professor Harris. My name is Michael. Oh, too loud. Okay, back. Okay, here we go. Is this good? I was just curious, so beyond just as a historian, when you were doing all this research on Swami Vivekananda, was there any lesson or thought or quote that impacted you so deeply, so profoundly that you'll keep with you for forever? There must have been so much, but I was curious if there was just one thing that you could share that just really impacted your own spirituality.
Yeah, it wasn't a quotation, but it was the difficulty for me to understand. There were two things. Divine play, lila. It was, lila fascinates me, and the importance of play. As it's play can be the most serious thing in the world. That's what Ramakrishna taught me. And that's why when we see children playing, we really should value it. Because they know, and this whole thing of the child and play, it's deep. This is a deep realization. That was the first thing. And I do not make any presumption of understanding it. But when I was about year 4 or 5 of this, when I wrote the book on Lord, I'm of Jewish origin. When I wrote the book on Lord, I spent a year at the Institut Catholique trying to understand Marianism, and that was hard enough, right? And Trinitarianism, I've been working hard on Trinitarianism, and I find it very difficult because you're not raised in these traditions. But when I approached Advaita, wow. And I think we should be awed by these and the importance of the metaphorical. So for me, of all the things that were most important, it was the salt doll. The salt doll that goes submerged in the sea and thinks that he will retain his distinctiveness, but doesn't understand that he will fall out into infinity. There was that something else that Vivekananda said about needing impurities in the milk to bob up, so that within the purity you needed the evil to understand what was not evil. And I think the metaphorical in these traditions is, without them we would be bereft completely, I think. And both of them as teachers were fantastic on the parabolizing. And at the Parliament, he talks about the frog in his own little well. Yeah, and it's all these funny things. And he uses something from Pasteur. He says the bacillus, he unlike Ramakrishna, he uses stuff that makes him he says to the world, I know about science, and he does. He knows, he really does know the evolutionary thought. He's read this stuff. So what I'm saying is, those are the things that always tripped me up. And so when I came to the metaphorical, I felt, that's what can help me. And the salt doll and the relationship to good and bad were really loving God in the terrible. That was really extraordinary to me. Yeah.
For me, what started it all, and I've said this many times, college, world religion, I believe it was an Indian lady that taught it. When we went to the Buddhism area of world religion, and the words that stuck to me to this day, that got me in a sense started in at least attempting to understand my emotions, understand suffering, let me put it that way, was everything is suffering. The world is suffering. Everything is suffering or the world is suffering, but I say everything is suffering. And that, whenever that was spoken to me, it kind of clicked a little bit. Not to the fullest degree, but it clicked just a little bit, enough to me to start realizing that. And I think the first example I thought was giving birth to a baby. That's like that's the joyful time. But then that's like, wait, there's a lot of pain involved. So I was like, okay, I get it. And then everything is suffering. That really stuck to me, and that made me to start to realize my emotions, not detach, just to realize and understand it. And by doing so, I was able to not suffer so much. So again, that was just a start for me.
And to all my friends who were not, who never, who had to listen to me go on and on about it for years. Oh, the book took me 8 to 10 years. It's a lot.
Bravo. Very nice.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for coming.
You're now an honorary Vedantin.
So it's a formality. My job is to thank Professor Harris. I was just thinking that Swami Vivekananda gave a test for truth. How do you know there is truth in something? And he says, oneness is a test of truth. And I was thinking, today we are talking about Vedanta and Vivekananda. And this is also the occasion, let us not forget, for the worship, Kali Puja, Deepavali and Kali Puja here. And philosophically, when we talk about it in Hinduism, they seem to be two different traditions, the Shakta tradition and the Advaita Vedanta tradition. And yet Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda, they make them one. And more than once, Professor Harris talked about Kali, Ma Kali. She always said Ma Kali here. Kali Ma, yes. How it is one, just a couple of weeks ago we heard Ayan Maharaj, Swami Medhananda, a new book, Swami Vivekananda's Vedantic Cosmopolitanism. That's a close reading of Vivekananda's as a text, especially the Vedanta teachings. And here today we have another very significant book. I was telling Ayan Maharaj that if you don't do anything else in your life, the book you wrote about Sri Ramakrishna and the book you wrote about Swami Vivekananda, that's more than enough for a lifetime's work. Those are significant books which will echo down for at least our time and generations to come. Similarly, here is another book, Guru to the World, which is a close look at Swami Vivekananda biographically and in relation to interlocutors, to disciples, to friends, to people he encountered, especially here in the West, especially American women, and also women in England. And these two, they're not two, they're one. Why? Vivekananda himself, almost the last thing he said about himself was that it may be that I shall see fit to give up this frame, in this form, this body, but I shall not cease to work. I shall be a voice without a form. I shall to continue to inspire humanity till the universe knows that it is one with God. And so the voice without a form is the text, is Vivekananda's teachings, which are now found in the complete works in Jnana Yoga and teachings on Vedanta, which Ayan Maharaj's book is a close reading of. And the life is Vivekananda's life and what he did, what he said, how he lived, and how he passed. 4th of July, 1902. He used to say, I won't live to see 40, and he was passed at the age of 39. And on a date he selected, which is a date, the freedom of liberty in the United States for July 4th.
I mean, wow, did he call it? And he also, you could in a sense say July 4th is, you could now incorporate that into celebration of the United States gaining freedom from Britain, and I want to say the celebration of Swami Vivekananda's death, but the celebration of his life before, celebration of his life during his passing. That's interesting now, which I will do.
So again, two, but they are one, text and life, words and life. So we are very delighted to have Professor Harris with us today. It was something that was long, it was in the works, because a couple of years ago I heard her speak at Harvard University. It was still a work in progress. And I'd been hearing reports from Professor Mitter that she is doing remarkable work, and she's like all praise and looking forward to the book. So I don't know if he's watching today, or maybe he'll watch later on. Professor Pato Mitter is a very eminent art historian and a scholar of art at Oxford University. So yes, this has been a culmination, but also a beginning. I think she'll be going around and talking about the book in different events from now on. Are you going to Boston?
I've already been.
Oh, you've been there?
Yeah.
For the launch of the book?
Yeah. No, well, I see this as the launch of the book.
Oh, very good.
Because it's where Vivekananda is the first Vedanta society.
Absolutely. 1894, this was the first Vedanta society. Swami Vivekananda, here in the West, he said one day he came home, and the lady in whose house he was staying, he said to her, "Today I have fallen in love." And she said, oh, she was bemused. "Who's the lucky woman?" And he said, "Oh, it's not a lady, it's organization. I've fallen in love with organization." And it starts here. the Vedanta Society of New York.
Oh, wow, that was, okay, abrupt. But, yeah, I guess it's something that I could incorporate easily. First, of course, I got to understand who he is. Otherwise, it's just a hollowed celebration of a person. But I can really appreciate everything he's done, so not completely hollow. But definitely want to know more about him now. His teaching seems to be that which I do want to follow. But again, this is merely just some understanding of his teachings. Sadhguru goes a little bit crazy, not crazy, but just with the mysticism stuff, it's not really my take, but I still am interested and curious. Eventually getting to some of that. And I know people have been saying about inner engineering, it's just, I know it's not the right time yet. And you can say, it's like, well, it'll never be the right time or anything, and perhaps. Again, I'm not going to be pushing myself into it when I know I'm not ready for it. But I definitely, as soon as things are aligned properly, I will get into it. And if that never is the case, then still, to me, it's still fine. I am not in a rush to do any of these things. If I'm forcing myself to do it, then I am not doing it right. So it definitely, a lot of things has excuse me, a lot of things have to line up. And so far I have been, in some sense, doing it by trying to be self-realized. And how? By just, again, understanding my emotions and thoughts. I can't just do the action though, the physical action. The thoughts, the emotions, the knowledge are not that big of an issue yet. I mean, obviously there's the strong parts of the emotion stuff that's very difficult to detach, but the physical action is something that I can't. I don't think I can. That one I may struggle with for sure. And I have to probably seek someone, or I don't know if they will teach that in some videos where they go specifically into not the karma thoughts, but the karma physical actions. I think those are the same. Your physical actions and your active thoughts are karma. Bhakti being love and devotion, which is not a problem necessarily. Raja Yoga, meditation, that has to come whenever everything's right. In my opinion, jnana, make sure you don't identify with things. Decently easy, except for, again, with the jnana and the karma, not identifying with your actions is kind of difficult. Physical actions. Thoughts, not so much. I think I can get that one. Anyways, this is my reaction to Vivekananda in America, Professor Ruth Harris. If you like my content, please consider subscribing, thumbs up, thumbs down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next vid.